I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody.
Welcome to the Saturday Morning Community Forum. Finally, it's convention. I've been telling you it's coming. Well, it's here today, and we have a power-packed broadcast for you today. Before I get into who's on the broadcast, I want to just share with you a few news briefs. One, we want to dedicate this broadcast to a longtime Push staff member, grew up, we call her a Push baby, April Branch. She made an untimely death this week. We are mourning her passing today, and her memorial service will be at Push if you're in the city of Chicago this afternoon at 1:30. It will also be streamed live on our Facebook page. We're praying for the Branch family, but we also ask you to pray for the Push family. April, like her mother, worked as Reverend Jackson's executive secretary. We will miss April so very much.
We were saddened to hear the news that our beloved April M. Branch, executive assistant to Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and faithful servant, made her transition suddenly. April meant so much to so many. She was a fearless freedom fighter, a devout fashionista, a staunch community, education, and women's rights advocate, an odds defier, a devoted mentor to many, refined perfume purveyor, a consummate fundraiser, supreme nurturer, an avid book reader, a historian, a sought-after chef, a relentless Push alumni archivist, a green-thumbed plant whisperer, an avid art collector, a restaurant connoisseur, a bangle music maker, a lover of video games, a Julian Jaguar's mantle bearer, a fireball of energy, and a blessed gatherer of family and friends. April had a tough mind, but a tender heart. If April Branch hugged you, all of your fears and tears were wiped away. We will miss you, April, until the end of time. What a woman. April Branch, your life mattered. May she rest in heavenly peace and power. A job well done. April M. Branch.
Greetings, Rainbow Push Coalition members and supporters. I'm Frank Watkins, Public Policy Director for the Rainbow Push Coalition, and this is an interview of Senator Dick Durbin regarding adding a right to vote amendment to the United States Constitution. Welcome, Senator Durbin.
Good to be with you.
So let's start out tough and get right to it. Senator Durbin is a Democrat from Illinois, and I'm going to quote him and then hold him accountable for what he said. During a debate over Ohio's Electoral College votes on January 6, 2005, in a Senate floor speech, Senator Durbin said the following: "The nature of this debate and the challenges which we are raising do not go to the results of the election, but rather go to the Electoral College system, to the electoral system. In the case of Reynolds versus Sims, the Supreme Court of the United States made it clear that we have a constitutional right to vote. Thank God. That decision, which was handed down in 1964, appears clear and unequivocal. But wait, 4 years ago, that same Supreme Court, in the case of Bush v. Gore, reached a different conclusion and stated that the individual citizen has no federal constitutional right to vote for electors for President of the United States. It appears that this statement by the High Court, the highest court in the land, is inconsistent with the decision reached 40 years ago. So where do we stand today? There is great uncertainty. Congressman Jesse Jackson of my home state of Illinois is proposing a constitutional amendment to make clear and unequivocal that we have a constitutional right to vote in America. I am loath to jump on the bandwagon for constitutional amendments, and I have seen some things done here that are not very proud moments in the history of the Senate when it comes to offering constitutional amendments. But I will take this one seriously. That's what Senator Durbin said on January the 6th, 2005. Senator Durbin, you stood by your commitment to take this one seriously, and you introduced a right to vote amendment in the Senate, I believe for the first time in the history of the country. And for that, you are to be commended. But we've noticed that neither you nor Representative Mark Pocan in the House have introduced a right to vote constitutional amendment in the 117th Congress. So specifically, we would like for you to share with our audience where things are in that regard. Let's start basic. Why is a right to vote constitutional amendment even needed?
Well, I think it is just essential to a democracy. If you view a democracy as a living human body, voting is the blood in that body. And as you deny blood to that body, it can no longer function as a human being. If you deny the right to vote to people in this country, it really challenges the survival of democracy. That's why I think it's fundamental. We've often thought that we could overcome efforts to suppress votes, and we have in some instances, but what we see now is a new attack on the right to vote across America. Some 20 different state legislatures are lessening and reducing opportunities to vote by eligible voters. And so I think we're at a point again where we need to reestablish the fundamental constitutional right to vote. I had hoped that would not be necessary, but I think it is. That's why I introduced the bill in the last Congress, and we'll introduce it again in this one.
I'm sure you're aware that about 119 nations elect their public officials in some public manner. 108 of them have a right to vote in their constitution. The United States is one of, I think it's 10 or 11 nation states that do not have a right to vote in their constitution. Such states as Azerbaijan and Iraq and so forth are the states that we are in bed with. With such a right to vote amendment, will such a right to vote amendment be introduced in the 117th Congress? If so, when? And if not, why not?
Yes, it will be introduced. And the only hesitation we have had is that this is a front and center issue, voter suppression. And we have two things that we are working on. The For the People Act, which is clearly authorized by the Constitution, where Congress can spell out those practices which are acceptable in federal voting and those that are not. That For the People Act failed because of a filibuster just a few weeks ago. So unfortunately, we're looking for another avenue. And the second thing is the Voting Rights Act. It's now known as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. It was a close ally of Reverend Jesse Jackson in the civil rights struggle. The Voting Rights Act set up a mechanism in the Department of Justice to review decisions by states and determine whether they were discriminatory, primarily on racial grounds, but to decide whether they were discriminatory. About 8 years ago, the Supreme Court in Shelby County versus Holder basically took out a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, saying it was not constitutional. And that provision was pre-clearance, which meant that at least, I think, 9 states, I may be mistaken on that number, but I think it was 9 states, when they, because of the history they had, the background they'd had in voter suppression, when they changed voting laws, those laws had to be submitted to the Department of Justice to be cleared before they could go into effect in that state. That's the provision that the Supreme Court removed. So we are trying to reestablish it. It's a tough row to hoe in a Senate that's 50-50, literally 50-50 Democrat, Republican, where you need at least 60 votes for that purpose.
I had kind of deduced that that's why the right to vote amendment had not been introduced in the Senate. I assume probably, well, I'm a little more confused about why it hasn't been introduced in the House, but.
Well, we're trying to keep it simple. We're coming to the point where we know where we stand on our efforts to find the bipartisan roll call. My determination to introduce it has not been diminished. It's been slightly delayed. That's what I'd say. And I cannot speak for Congressman Pocan, but I will tell you that I am prepared to reintroduce it with Elizabeth Warren in the United States Senate. We're going to wait for the proper moment, but believe me, it will be during this session of Congress.
Very good. Have you been talking with other Senate members about becoming original co-sponsors of a right to vote amendment, and what has been their response? Do they have questions or objections? If so, what are they? Do they understand that an affirmative fundamental right to vote is not in the Constitution?
Yes, many of them understand it. And I will tell you that we've had good fortune initially. As I mentioned, Elizabeth Warren is my co-sponsor of this measure, and everyone knows her by reputation. Very bright, very determined, very able. I'm glad to have her as my co-sponsor. Others include Bernie Sanders, Jeff Merkley, Mazie Hirono, Senator Markey, Chris Van Hollen, Dick Blumenthal, and Chris Coons. So we have 7 co-sponsors joining Elizabeth and myself. It's a start. We have not actively worked it. You asked, what's their reaction? Well, they have a lot of questions. You know, like me, and that speech that you mentioned earlier, I am really skeptical of people who want to amend the Constitution. I've seen some pretty dumb ideas come out as constitutional amendments in my time, and I try not to abuse that document, the wisdom that is contained in it, by suggesting constitutional amendments that have no place in the body. But this one does. Their fundamental right to vote is no longer so certain that we can ignore the reality that we need explicit constitutional language.
I'm not sure that most people, actually, most Americans, and I suspect a good number of members of Congress, don't realize that their vote is protected by their state, not by the Constitution. And that's why these states can do what they're doing. In Texas, you can vote if you show your gun registration, which is state issued, but you can't vote if you show your student ID, which is also state issued. So right now, our vote is protected by our states and not by the Constitution. Since you are going to introduce the right to vote at some point, please notify us in a timely fashion and let us know what you want us to do to be supportive. We have some ideas and have made some plans, but we welcome any suggestions you might have. What do you need us to do?
Well, first, I want to give credit where it's due. Reverend Jackson, who has been a friend of mine for many, many years, I won't count the number, he was the one who first came to me with the concept and mentioned the fact that his son, who was then a congressman, Jesse Jackson Jr., was going to introduce it in the House of Representatives. So giving credit where it's due, it was the Reverend and his son who took the leadership on this. And I have tried to pick up this cause. I didn't realize that it would become even more timely with what we're going through. But, you know, the bottom line is this. We know that we're going through a very difficult period. We know that coming up with 67 votes in the Senate for a constitutional amendment is beyond us at this moment. The idea that we get every Democrat and then 17 Republicans to come forward, but that shouldn't stop us a bit. As far as I'm concerned, this is an educational experience. And as Americans across the country become more sensitive to the fact that you mentioned that many states are reducing the opportunity to vote, I think we're going to have a more fulsome support for this effort.
When Reverend Jackson was considering a run for president in 1983, we were engaged in our Southern crusade to registered voters and to get the 65 Voting Rights Act enforced. During the crusade, we met with former Alabama Governor George Wallace, and he had some advice for Reverend Jackson. He said, Jesse, if you run, make sure your message is simple and down where the goats can get it. In my judgment, the simplest and most effective message on the right to vote amendment is to contrast it with the right to a gun. After the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Second Amendment in the Heller decision, Democrats should be contrasting the fact that the fundamental individual right to a gun is in the Constitution. And you know how the Republicans and some Democrats love their Second Amendment right. But the fundamental individual right to vote is not in the Constitution. I don't hear that contrast being made very much. The simple point that simple point should be driven home to the public and members of Congress over and over again. To put it in straight political language, it's a great wedge issue. When I make that point in public speeches, I can hear people in the audience say, that's crazy. What's your take on that approach?
I love that argument. I had not heard it stated as succinctly as you just did, but it really gets down to the basics. If the right to bear arms under the Heller decision is a personal right to me, and that was debated for decades as to whether the well-formed militia language meant that it was a right to a group, a different group, but not personal to us. Well, Heller decided it was personal to us. And why the right to vote is not personal to us as well is beyond me. I go back to the point I made at the opening. If democracy is a body politic, the right to vote is the blood in that body. And as you restrict that blood circulation, as you restrict the right to vote, you start to atrophy as a democracy. Less participation, less credibility. And so I think by paralleling the right to bear arms, you make a very powerful argument.
Senator, do you have any final thoughts or information that you would like to share with us?
Well, the point is this. We are speaking in terms of protecting the right to vote. I have just got to say to people, exercise your right to vote. That is the only way that we're going to bring about real change that protects your right as an American citizen. I remember when Barack Obama ran for president, and I remember my fear of what was going to happen as they tried to discourage Black voters from voting for him for president of the United States. And I just wondered how far they would go. What I did not appreciate until after it was over was the determination so many people had, particularly African Americans, that they were willing to stand in line for hours, literally for hours, to exercise their right to vote. They would not be defied by these people who were trying to figure out obstacles to voting. And when you look at their determination and their courage in doing that, how can we do anything less than to guarantee that fundamental right to vote across America? If you have that fundamental right vote guarantee, the prospect of somebody standing in line for hours because there aren't enough polling stations, would be challenged on its face. And we would be able to say, you cannot do that. The fundamental right to vote supersedes any effort to limit by polling places and the like. We desperately need to do that again. And I think this right to vote amendment makes more sense now than ever.
Yes, if we had a right to vote, Congress can pass legislation that would prevent those kind of long lines from happening. It could set the criteria. It could set national standards for voting that would be applicable in all states.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Senator Durbin, for appearing at the Rainbow Push Coalition convention and updating us on where things are with respect to adding right to vote amendment to the United States Constitution. And as they say, you're the man. Again, thank you very much.
Push Newswire. Today we have a lot to share with you on the Newswire. First of all, we want to let you know the Frito-Lay workers have signed a contract that guarantees them at least 1 day a week off. Every worker needs adequate wages and adequate benefits. We want to dedicate this broadcast also to Bob Moses, who was the former field secretary for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference's voter registration campaign in 1964. It is unimaginable that he died at 86 And here we are again pushing voter registration, fighting against voter suppression. We applaud, along with Native Americans, the change of the name of the Cleveland Indians to now the Cleveland Guardians. We appreciate the recognition and respect for Native American culture. Emmett Till would have been Emmett Till's birthday this year, 80th birthday this year. In Chicago, his home is being dedicated as a historic landmark. And so here's a young man who didn't live very long, but his life sparked a whole movement for public accommodations and civil rights. And so we thank his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, for her faithfulness and her refusal to let her son die in vain. 2 black women are named to run Texas's 2 largest newspapers, Catrice Hardy, Dallas Morning News, and Maria Douglas read the Houston Chronicle. Congratulations to them. And while we're talking about Texas, you wonder where Reverend Jackson is. Well, he's in Texas. He is, along with several hundred ministers and thousands of protesters, engaged in a historic march similar to the march from Selma to Montgomery. They're marching to the state capitol in Austin, Texas, demanding that these voter suppression laws not be passed and demanding that elections be fair and open. We're launching campaigns, Reverend Jackson and Rainbow Push launching campaigns all across the nation, every state where voter suppression seems to reside. We're urging faith leaders, community leaders, activists to join with Reverend Jackson, Reverend Barber, and others, Barbara Arnwine, as we march on these state capitals all around the country. It's states' wrongs, and we're going to make the states right. We're going to march on them. We're going to challenge these erroneous public policies. On a good note, a black family may finally receive the land that was taken from them, called Bruce's Beach, over 100 years ago. They may finally get the land back. That's reparations. Give back the land that you took from people. Our final news brief is really a sad note, but also a respectful note. When I think about Simone Biles, young, powerful gymnast who has decided not to continue to compete at the World Olympics, we understand and support Simone in her decision not to push herself any further. Many athletes, everybody focuses on their physical health. Well, they have emotional challenges and needs, especially when you're number one in your field, especially when you've been abused by the people that are supposed to support you, the coaches, the doctors, and so forth, when you have been improperly handled. And now you're on the world stage and you have no one around you from your family that you can lean on, depend on, and trust. And so Simone is raising a critical issue that many young female athletes in particular have not raised over these many, many years. And so we thank you, Simone, for calling the injustices out and making them public, but also for standing tall and saying, it's not enough for me to suffer internally and emotionally and keep going like I'm some robot or some gladiator. She's not. And so we thank you, Simone, for your public witness, but we also thank you for your absolute unwavering faith and strength. And so we're going to be praying for you, and we will be available to support you and other athletes who are struggling in this season with the emotional pressures of being in the limelight every single day and every single hour. There's so much more we want to cover, can't cover it. It's convention time. We have today Reverend Dr. William Bishop Barber, who is going to share with us a message about the Repairs of the Breach campaign that he has launched across America. Reverend Jackson is partnering with Reverend Barber, and so I know you can't wait to hear him. You're going to also hear from Attorney Barbara Arnwine, who is the one young African-American female lawyer traveling the length and breadth of this nation, fighting against voter suppression, marching to make sure that everyone has equal access, ability to vote freely and fairly where they live, students voting on their campus. I just don't want you to miss it. Stay tuned.
is Christopher Hodges here at the Rainbow Push Coalition, where our leader is Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, whom we love all over the world. I just want to invite you all to our annual Reverend Clay Evans Gospel Concert. You do not want to miss this grand event, and we want to invite you to come and let's celebrate it together. We have great artists, we have great honorees to come. That's going to be August the 1st at 7 o'clock, but it's going to be virtual. I'm excited about that part, y'all. It's going to be virtual concert. It's going to be exciting. I want everyone to go to their local app store. If you got an iPhone, you're my friend. I want you to go to that app store, and the Google players, y'all find it. All right, and then all other streaming incomes, download our app here at Rainbow Push. We love you. We're excited. Go tell a friend that the Rainbow Push Coalition is happening August 1st, the gospel concert. We love you. Bless you.
For 2021, we're excited to get more people engaged and involved in Rainbow Push, supporting the programs of Push for Excellence and the Citizenship Education Fund. Now, if you're interested in public policy and you want to help change the policies that impact those who are incarcerated, you can do so. If you're interested in impacting public policies that benefit education and businesses with social economic solutions, you can do that as well. You can become a policymaker by becoming a member of Rainbow Push right now. Now, if you believe in the scholarships that we've given to thousands of students each year, you can help us out. We've awarded more than $10 million in scholarships year to date. Now, you can help young people achieve a higher education by becoming a member of Rainbow Push right now for the annual fee of only $35. And if you're a student or a senior, it's only $15. You can help us make a difference in the lives of millions. Now, if you watch us every week, or if you listen to us on the radio, or if you're viewing on social media, we need you to become a member. And how do you become a member? It's simple. Visit us at rainbowpush.org and press join. Maybe you'd like to support the work of Push. If so, it's really simple. You can do so by texting the word PUSH, that's P-U-S-H, to 41444 on your cell phone, and you can give any amount that you feel comfortable giving, or you can call us at 773-256-2775 or go to rainbowpush.org and push donate. So whenever you want to support, you can do it from anywhere. So keep pushing, because we're going to keep pushing for you and keep hope alive.
Be in the virtual room where it happens. Join us for the Rainbow Push 55th Annual International Virtual Convention, Beyond Freedom, focused on structural inequality, August 1st through 6th, 2021. Daily power hours kicking off with the Reverend Clay Evans Gospel Concert, featuring gospel's finest Shirley Caesar, Dottie Peoples, Jonathan McReynolds, and Charles Jenkins. Expert keynote speakers including world-renowned epidemiologist Anthony Fauci, voting rights champion Stacey Abrams, Housing Secretary Marcia Fudge, Civil Rights Attorney Ben Crump, author and activist Etan Thomas, NCNW President Janice Mathis, Ariel Investments co-CEO John Rogers, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka, American Federation of Teachers President Randy Weingarten, and National Bar Association President C.K. Hoffler. And join us as Reverend Jackson receives the Legion of Honor Award in Paris. Register today at rainbowpush.org and keep hope alive.
I want y'all to receive with me the honorable man of God with a prophetic word for a prophetic work. And we know God is going to give us a prophetic win. Let's celebrate the presence of Reverend Dr. Bishop, come on, William Barber II.
Gracious God, we know that whenever you call men and women to preach your word, you take the risk of putting treasure in trash, treasure in an earthen vessel, that the excellency of the power might be of thee and not of us. Hide us behind the cross, cover us in your blood, fill us with your spirit. Come, Holy Spirit, come with teaching, preaching, and hearing power. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, there are moments when you're in a battle. There are moments you need shouting words, and then there are moments you need instructive words. And really what's good is when you get both. And so this evening, your bishop said, would you come, Reverend, and just do a little teaching about this moment that we're in. And we have churches of congregations of every race, creed, and color tuned in all over the nation. So I want to look at the scripture. 2 Chronicles 21:15 through 22. Once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. And David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. And Ishbosheth, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, and who was armed with a new sword, said he would kill David. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to David's rescue. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. Then David's men swore to him. They spoke up and said, never again will you go out with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished. Now the rest of the text will tell us there was another giant named Saph, and they killed him. There was another one named the brother of Goliath, a Gittite, who speared with a shaft like a weaver's rod, and they spoke up and stood up and killed him. Then there was a huge man with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all, and they killed him. Jonathan, son of Shemaiah, David's brother, killed him. And these 4 were descendants of Rapha in Gath, and all 4 of them fell at the hands of David and his men. And then in 2 Samuel 22, when David is recounting what happened, in the 14th verse, he says, in my distress, I called to the Lord. I called out to my God from his temple. He heard my voice. And if you go down a little bit, it will then say, and then the Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High God resounded. He shot his arrows and scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning, he routed them. And the valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth were laid bare at the rebuke of the Lord. In this moment, I want to talk about, in every generation, somebody must stand up and speak up. If you could be COVID safe and just look at somebody and say, in every generation, somebody must stand up and speak up. In this biblical story, King David is old, and he's come through many battles. The truth is, he thought some things were behind him. He was a little confused that he was still having to fight what he had already fought. But the Bible says he and his men had to battle the Philistines again. Now you will remember that David gained fame as a young man because of his battle with the Philistine giant Goliath. In our children's books and Bibles, David silences the Philistines by slaying Goliath. In Michelangelo's Renaissance masterpiece, David is celebrated as an epic hero with his simple sling swung over his shoulder. He's painted to be an eternal victor over the enemies that threaten his people and their well-being. But in today's text, it reminds us that Goliath was not the only giant. King David's men faced 4 more giants, one the brother of Goliath. David and his people find out that giants keep coming, and that every generation has its battles and its challenges. And sometimes They don't care if you're tired. And every generation, that's why every generation needs a witness who are willing to trust God in the face of difficult odds. This is still true today. We too have stones and days in our remembrance like David of Goliaths we have stood up to. Goliaths of racism. Dr. King stands tall in white marble on the National Mall. And so many foot soldiers of the struggle for justice are memorialized in their own hometowns. We celebrate Labor Day to honor those who stood against the Goliath of economic justice. We commemorate the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge to honor everyday women and men of Dallas County, Alabama, who overcame the Goliaths of Jim Crow. But today's text is not about celebrating the victory over Goliath of the former generations. It's about facing the Goliaths of our own generation. In fact, the Goliaths that have the same bloodline as the Goliaths of the past. David's men saw that they were still in battle. I know you're tired sometime. I know you're tired, but Goliaths don't care, and their cousins don't care. The truth of the matter is David faced Goliath at the worst two times he should have been fighting. When he was too young and when he was too old. And in the midst of that, these men, they do two things we must do. They stood up and they spoke up. They did not run or hide or look for someone else. They spoke up and said, we must do this. And they tell David, you be the symbol of God's light. You be the testimony that it's possible to beat giants. And we will fight and defeat these four enemies. And my brothers and sisters, when I think about where we are right now this afternoon, can I just take my time and teach? Here we are, 245 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and we still got giants. Here we are, 234 years since the Constitution was adopted, in which we were fractionized in that Constitution and called 3/5 of a person, and we still got giants. Here we are 192 years since Mexico outlawed slavery, which is why Texas white folk pulled out of Mexico, not because they were so patriotic, they wanted to keep their slaves. Here we are 172 years since Harriet Tubman escaped slavery, and 169 years since Frederick Douglass said in his 5th of July speech, what is the 4th of July? To the slave, and he declared that it was nothing but fraud, bombast, and hypocrisy until America did right by the sons and daughters of slaves, and we still have giants. 158 years since the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. 91 years since a white woman named Jessie Daniel Ames of Georgetown, Texas, took on the Klan in 1930 with the Association of Southern Women for the Prevention of the Lynching of Black folk. She said, this white woman to the KKK, you are not protecting my virtue and you will not use me in your evil. 91 years since that happened. 77 years since Smith versus Allwright, which was a case that was built on a case out of Texas, opened up primaries for black people. Here we are, 55 years since Barbara Jordan became the first African American to sit in the Texas Senate. Here we are, 57 years since Fannie Lou Hamer said she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Here we are, 60 years after Dr. King said to the AFL-CIO that the only voting bloc that could transform America would be for black folk and labor folk and poor white folk and Latinos to learn how to work together. Here we are, 58 years since the March on Washington. Here we are 57 years since the signing of the Civil Rights Act, and 50 years since the 24th Amendment ended poll tax, and 56 years since the Voting Rights Act, and 47 years since the Southwest Voter Registration Education Project established by Mexican Americans. And here we are 15 years since the Congress reauthorized the Voting Rights Act. And here we are, just a few years since we had a president named Barack Hussein Obama. And even though we have come through all of this and seen all of this, we still have giants. And we better know how to understand them. The first giant we have is that of voter suppression. Let me slow this and take it easy here. Make sure folk get it. Get out your pens. This giant in many ways is as old as the Constitution. When those who outlined the government for we the people put subversion of the democracy in the Constitution. White men without land couldn't vote. The folk who owned the land before we got here, natives couldn't vote. Women couldn't vote. Black folk couldn't vote. This giant, he's as old as the question asked of the 13th Amendment and eventually answered by the 15th Amendment. 13th Amendment freed the slaves. And if you think about that a minute, we're the only people who had to have something written on paper to give us what came from God. Freedom. I know I'm in church, but that's a damn shame. When a nation to think that you give me, you had to pass an amendment for what God gave me. The 15th Amendment said nobody has the right to deny or abridge the right to vote. This giant of voter suppression is as old as Goliath. This giant is as old as the fight for women's suffrage that women, white women, did not get until 1920. He's as old as all the people, black and white, trying to secure the ballot. And he did not go away. He reproduced. This giant is as old as Kevin Phillips in the late 1960s. He was the advisor to Richard Nixon. And he told Richard Nixon that the Republican Party could win without the Negro votes if they painted the Democrats as the black party. Listen to me now. And Kevin Phillips said, we can have a new American revolution coming out of the South and the Southwest. We will use the fears and objections raised by the civil rights movement. And Buchanan, Patrick Buchanan, his aide said, we will engage in positive polarization. We will intentionally split the nation for the purposes of having power. Don't you all think this stuff started with Trump? And then Howard Dent, the other advisor to Nixon, said, let's do it and always disavow it publicly. And from Nixon to Reagan to Bush, it all has its roots, this giant. You see, Trump didn't start the lie, he inherited it. That's why the lie has so much tenacity, because it's a rooted lie. It's an old lie. It's a lie that's been told over and over again. And they said if we can just control from Maryland to New Mexico, and if we can get Democrats, particularly the white Democrats, to stop fighting in the South, and stop organizing and stop putting money in the South, we can control from Maryland to Texas, actually from Maryland to New Mexico. And that's over 193 electoral votes, which means you only need about 80 from the other 30-some states. It's over 30% of the United States House. It's over 26, 27 members of the United States Senate. And they wanted to do this at the very time that poor and low-wealth people of every race have 30% of the electorate now. Poor and low-wealth people make up 65 million votes. 1/3 of all poor people live in the South. 1/3 of all poor white people live in the South. Poor and low wealth people actually hold the key to the transformation of this nation. And so today's giant of voter suppression is the descendant of giants we've seen before. It's the descendant of states' rights. Now watch me. I told you I want to teach a little bit to this national audience. States' rights began before the Civil War, not afterwards. Because the goal of states' rights first was to block white folk that were on the side of anti-slavery legislation. Huh? And what happened was the Confederacy militarized it. The KKK added violence. Plessy versus Ferguson legalized it. It was picked up and continued by Strom Thurmond and Barry Goldwater in 1964. It was continued by George Wallace. It was made a Republican Southern strategy by Kevin Phillips and Lee Atwater. It was picked up by Ronald Reagan, continued by Pat Buchanan and George Bush, and Donald Trump just charismatized it and pushed it with media savvy and invested in it billions of dollars and the backing of greedy elites like Mitch McConnell. We've had 4 national elections since the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. You hear me well. 4 elections now in this country without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act that Lyndon Baines Johnson signed on August the 6th, 1965, and gave the first pen to Eric Dick Dirksen, a Republican, who brought Republicans with him to pass that, and the second pen to Martin Luther King. As we sit here today, we have less voting rights today than we had August 6, 1965. That's why you must understand that this is not just a black issue. It's not just a black civil rights giant. It's a giant for everybody that cares about democracy. When you look at these bills that they're writing from Texas to West Virginia, these bills will hurt black people, they will hurt white people, they'll hurt women, they'll hurt students, they'll hurt the disabled, they'll hurt Aaron. This is a coup d'etat politically. See, January 6th may have been the signal to engage in an insurrection politically inside of state houses. You hear what I'm saying, Williams? See, January 6th might have just been the signal to pull off the insurrection inside of state houses. And our democracy is at stake because of the voter suppression. Let me go a little further. I won't take long, but I got to take time. In 2006, you see Trump won. He wins by 20,000 votes. For instance, in Wisconsin, but 250,000 votes were suppressed. Trump wins the Electoral College in 2016 by a little over 40,000 votes in 3 states. He loses the popular vote by 5 million votes. Let's be clear, my brothers and sisters. I know I don't want to pour water on nobody. But Joe Biden didn't win the Electoral College by 7 million votes. He only won by 45,000 cumulative votes. If there had been 45,000 more votes for Trump in Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, we would have a president who lost by 7 million votes and still be sitting in the White House. And 56 million Americans, not just black people, 56 million Americans use the very ways of voting that the state houses are now trying to eradicate. This is states' rights gone crazy. This is not Jim Crow. This is James Crow, Esquire. This is the racism, just like the founding of the Klan. When the Klan was first founded, it was not founded to go after black people. The Klan was first founded to go after white people who were in relationship with black people. Whoo! Huh? And Republicans have introduced over 389 bills and enacted 28 laws in 17 states. Now, there are some, and Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee will tell you that I'm telling you the truth, There are some that say, well, members of the Black Caucus, y'all just cool down. Don't worry. We don't need to pass a bill. Just mobilize more voters. That's an elitist foolishness to say, we don't need the protection. Just y'all need to just mobilize more. And then they say, and we'll give you $25 million. In $1 billion election, we're spending that upwards of $1 billion per general election. Then there are some that say, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. You can't out-mobilize racist gerrymandering. Then some people will say, well, just litigate. First of all, the Supreme Court, Justice Alito just said a little discrimination is all right. Did y'all hear have y'all read that decision? He literally said that as long as politicians say they're doing it for partisan reason, it's fine. He said, if you just say that, it can be as racist as all get out. All you got to do is say, but we didn't do that for race reason. We did it for partisan reason. And he said, like, a little discrimination is just got to happen, but a little arsenic will kill you. And you can't litigate this. See, I went through this. We went in 2013 when the Voting Rights Act was gutted. One of our state senators said to me, he said to our newspaper, now that the headache has been removed. And when and they went on to pass the worst voting law after Shelby. Y'all had the worst one before Shelby. We had the worst one after Shelby. And in that law, they decided to retrogress. That is, go back and take off the books what voters had used for 3 elections that the movement had won. Same-day registration, early voting. When we got in court, the lawyer said retrogression is allowable because there's no Voting Rights Act pre-clearance. And it took us 4 years, 1,200 people getting arrested, and 4 years to win. But while we were winning, they were in office using the bad law. So we had an unconstitutionally constituted Senate and House and congressional representation in North Carolina. And when we beat them, we couldn't go back and undo all the bad laws. Y'all need to hear what I'm saying? It took us 20 pro bono lawyers. And the state understand if they pass the law, this is the worst part of it. If they pass this law, for those that say, well, y'all ought to just litigate your way out of it, they will take your money and litigate against you. Because if they pass this Texas law, then the Texas Attorney General has to defend it with your money and every other money in states. Huh? Some say, let's just do physical infrastructure. That's what we're hearing now. I'm going to say what the politicians can't say. You can't choose to build up the infrastructure of bridges and then let the infrastructure of your democracy be torn down. That don't make no sense. Now, you can do both at the same time, but you can't choose one or the other. Huh? See, because the Constitution says something about that. They say, well, we want to build bridges, and then we'll come back to that. There ain't no coming back. Because the Constitution says no one has the right to deny or abridge. Voting rights is the bridge. That's the bridge to living wage. That's the bridge to health care for everybody. That's the bridge to equal protection under the law. And that's an elitist attitude when you say we're going to deal with this through infrastructure, we're going to get infrastructure. And when you use the bargaining for the infrastructure to get somebody to vote with you on infrastructure by saying you're not going to push them on voting rights. I don't care if it's a Democrat or Republican. That makes no sense. And so, my brothers and sisters, we don't need an insurrection. We need a resurrection of folk that will stand up. But now, I could close here. Maybe in some sermons I would, but since I'm teaching, there's another giant. Ain't just one giant.
And the second giant that is like in our text, they're all connected. And the second giant, his name is Mean Green. Huh? Yeah, see, Mean Green. And you got to understand that you can't have a conversation about voting rights and not have a conversation about economic justice and dealing with poverty and low wealth. And I'm challenging, especially black politicians, to not allow them to have a binary conversation. Well, you're just talking about this as a black issue. First of all, that's a way to lose. It's only a black issue. You got to show how this stuff is going to hurt everybody. And then you got to show how it will hurt us differently and greater, but you still got, but King said at the end of the march from Selma to Montgomery, Dr. King said that what scares the racist aristocracy is when there's the possibility for black and white masses of poor and low wealth people to come together and vote in a way that changes the economic architecture. Now, if you don't believe the economics is tied up in here, if there's not a giant called Mean Green, do you understand that when somebody like Manchin or McConnell says they don't want the For the People Act, what they're saying is they don't want dark money out of politics? Because that's in the act. Huh? They're saying that they don't want felony reenfranchisement. That's in the act. They're saying that they don't want all of these different ways of voting, because if there's a lot of different ways of voting, then that's people can vote and overcome the influence of money. If you don't think money is in this, why is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce even in this battle? And why will members of that in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce give civil rights organizations money to help mute their voice? I knew it wasn't going to get no amen. See, you got to understand, for Mean Green, for mean folk, racism never was just about not liking you because of the color of your skin. It was about money. It's about money. Mean Green. How can we use these folk to make money, and how can we create a system that these people will never hook up with poor white folk and poor other folk and form alliances? And so for other folk, suppressing the vote is about the redistribution of money. Because if they suppress the vote, they can suppress living wages and suppress a fair tax policy and suppress health care. That's why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce applauded Joe Manchin in Sinema. Why I got to go to Arizona? Because we're going to sit in her office tomorrow in Arizona. Huh? I'm probably going to they might arrest us, but that's their business. We're not going to get arrested. We're going to talk. But if they arrest us, we're not moving. Huh? These politicians, they don't want to get this dark money out. Huh? They don't want climate justice because the oil companies don't want it. And the oil companies are connected to ALEC and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Those who want voter suppression believe in trickle-down economics. And even if they're Democrats that believe in that won't pass the For the People's Act, then they too, may not believe in trickle-down, but they believe in neoliberalism, just lifting the middle class up. So that's the second giant. And then there's a third giant, and that's poverty itself. We're the richest nation in the history of the world, and right now, even before COVID, we had 140 million Americans in poverty. Now, when they go to D.C., they will tell our Congress people it's only 39 million. But that's because they use poverty measurement, which is 50 years old. It was a bad measurement when it was put there, and that measurement says if you make $12,800 a year, you're not poor. So don't believe that number. It's 140 million poor and low wealth people. Only 39% of people in America can afford a $1,000 emergency. There's not a county in this country anywhere where somebody can afford rent on minimum wage. In Texas, you got to work 101 hours a week at minimum wage to afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment and eat meat twice a week.
And this was before the pandemic. Now, we talk about people been talking about dying. 700 people were dying a day from poverty before the pandemic. 250,000 people a year before the pandemic. 7 people died from vaping, and the White House had a White House convening, and we had legislative session. 700 people dying a day from poverty, and we can't even get a candidate for president to even talk about poverty. When's the last time you had heard about a debate on poverty? 60.9% of black folk are poor and low wealth. That's why I say to every preacher, you are engaging in theological malpractice and heresy when you ask folk to give tithes, but you won't get out here and fight for justice. And I've even said to the members of the Black Caucus, poverty ought to be at the top of the agenda, not just the working class, poverty, because the majority of poor folk are working. Now, the other side you should know is that while 60.9% of black people are poor, 30% of white people are poor, but that's 66 million people compared to 26 million black people. So there are 40 million more poor white folk and low wealth than there are black. That's why we got to build these alliances. Huh? Poverty. And sometimes they try to make poverty to just be a black and brown issue, and it is. 68% of brown people are poor, 68% of native people, 60% of black people. But there's another truth. I'm meeting with people up in Appalachia, white Appalachians in Kentucky. And one of the things that we talk about is if you poor and can't pay your light bill, we all black in the dark. When a baby cries hunger, they don't cry black. They don't cry in white. They don't cry in 3D. They cry pain. And let me just say, we ought to all confess, all of us, especially particularly black folk, when we let Manchin off the hook when he blocked 15. God, I'm taking too much time. But when he blocked 15 in the Recovery Act, the House passed it. Sheila Jackson Lee, I'm sorry, I call you still representative. They passed it, went to the Senate. The Senate took it out. Watch this now. I want to show you something. If the Senate had kept 15 in the bill they sent, and it went to the parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian had overruled it, then it would have come to Vice President Kamala Harris. And if Vice President Kamala Harris overruled him, they would have needed 60 votes. They didn't have 60 votes. But when they took it out and let the parliamentarian overrule it and then told Bernie Sanders to make a motion, he made a motion, they only needed 51 votes to stop it. So a black female vice president was undercut. And that's why today, when they passed the pandemic recovery bill, we don't have $15 minimum wage in there. Now watch this. If that 15 had stayed in there, 40% of black folk would have come up out of poverty immediately. So 40%. And 32 million Americans would have come up out of poverty. And tip workers, you know, folk that go to the restaurant, they don't make but $2.13 an hour. And 60% of them couldn't even apply for the pandemic recovery money and the unemployment because they don't make enough base pay. And so what we ended up doing is we changed people's names during the pandemic from service workers to essential workers. But then we didn't give them the essentials they need to live. And we treated them like expendable. And even after they saved the country by going to work first and getting infected first and getting sick first and going to the hospital first and dying first, we allow Manchin, a Democrat, to block 15. And there wasn't a loud enough outcry, even from our communities. Because, see, they try to teach us that there ain't a black issue. That's why you got to resist them saying, no, voting is a black issue. No, all of the issues are black issues. Voting rights, health care, living wages, all of it. And during this pandemic, billionaires made $2 trillion, while 8 million more people fell into poverty. Well, I got to go to Arizona. But there's a fourth giant. His name is filibuster. Now, you ought to tell by his name he ain't worth a nickel. He tell you what he gonna do, bust stuff up. Huh? And the filibuster has never been used to bring people together. It's a terrible thing. It's a giant that gobbles up civil rights and gobbles up labor rights. In the 1800s, the filibuster was used to stop every piece of anti-slavery legislation, and it's not a constitutional provision. In 1937, a white mob in Duck Hill, Mississippi, took 2 black men, Roosevelt Towns and Boot Jack McDaniels, beat them, burned them, killed them. And because of that, somebody in the U.S. House of Representatives responded by passing an anti-lynching bill. But it was filibustered in the United States Senate. Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to make sure that people in the agrarian culture, that's farmers, and people in the domestic culture were able to pay into Social Security, and it was filibuster. So when the New Deal was passed and Social Security, paying into Social Security was passed, people in the agrarian culture, mostly black folk, couldn't pay in. Domestic people couldn't pay. 50% of white women couldn't pay in. And that didn't change till 1954, filibuster. Every piece of civil rights legislation, filibuster. The attempt to get women the right to vote, filibuster. 5 times between 1942 and 1949, there was a filibuster trying to, on the effort to ban poll taxes. Strom Thurmond and Dick Russell used the filibuster to weaken the Civil Rights Act. That's why we had to come back and do a Voting Rights Act, because voting right was in the original Civil Rights Act. Filibuster. After the war, the filibuster was used to block the Taft-Hartley right to work. 1974, there was a 5-year effort to pass a bill to create an independent consumer protection agency. What slowed it down? Filibuster. Filibuster is not just something that's gone after white folk, black folk. It's gone after every progressive piece of legislation. 1972, Southern conservative senators blocked legislation for the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. Filibuster. Said, you're not gonna study job discrimination. We're not gonna give you that power. In 2014, the filibuster successfully barred Protect the Women's Health from Corporate Interference Act. In that act, and what that means is they wanted to protect people that didn't want to include contraceptives in women's insurance plans. But they did put Viagra in there. They filibustered the sisters, but they passed Viagra. This giant named filibuster, he's a terrible thing. And he's paid for by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Legislative Exchange. He's been used to block everything from voting rights to living wages to immigration reform to health care. And when Joe Manchin says the filibuster is used to bring people together, he's lying. Huh? I love the president. I think he has the right heart. But I had to say the other night, I have no doubt, Mr. President, that you care and want to do right. But as a clergy person, when you say ending the filibuster will create chaos, that obscures the fact that the filibuster is chaos. Don't you think it's chaos that you can't get a George Floyd Act? Don't you think it's chaos that you can't pass the For the People's Act? Don't you think it's chaos that we can't have $15 living wage? Don't you think it's chaos that every congressperson gets free health care paid for by us, but the people don't have universal health care? Don't you think it's chaos? Filibuster causes chaos, Mr. President. And it's high time that we say that. And it's been used for a long time. best thing we need to say is the filibuster is a non-constitutional procedure that has now become a cowardly form of interposition and nullification. Because it used to be they had to stand on the floor. Now they don't even have to defend her. And then the filibuster can make you make silly deals, and I'm through. Here's the deal they're trying to offer now. Somebody called me about it. Well, Reverend Barber, you know, Manchin has said he believes in the Voting Rights Act, and he might be willing to consider the Voting Rights Act if y'all back up on the For the People Act. You know, some of us go to the library. And some of us, you can't pee on us and tell us it's raining. First of all, there ain't no Voting Rights Act right now. It's being written. It's not written. So for him to say he agrees with something that isn't even written, well, you need to know this. He was a co-sponsor of the For the People Act. Mm-hmm. But he was a co-sponsor when McConnell was leader, and he knew it wouldn't come to the floor. So he did that so he could run in his state saying he was for it. But now that there's a new leader who's for it, he's not for it. Huh? So he can say all he wants to, I'm for the voting right. There's not a bill. I'm not lying. Let me, Congressman Lee, Congressman, you Judiciary Committee, have y'all passed the Voting Rights Act? She just said we're writing it. And you got to do a lot of writing because what Alito just did. Now, here's the third thing you know. If states like Texas are allowed to pass these bills, you cannot retrogress pre-clearance. If they pass the bill and then we pass the Voting Rights Act and reclaim pre-clearance, you can't then go back. All you can do is wait till they pass a bill worse than the bill they passed. So the only game in town is the For the People's Act. And you can't let him gut that. That's like passing the George Floyd Act with immunity. If you got immunity, it doesn't matter what you pass. The filibuster will make you do crazy stuff if you don't have some heart and just stand on what's right. Huh? See, the filibuster is sin. It ain't just political, it's sin. You say, Barbara, how you know it's sin? Because the Bible says so. Isaiah 10, woe unto those who legislate evil and rob the poor of their rights. It's sin. Matthew 23:23, Jesus said, woe unto those who go through all of your religious obligations. You even tea leave, but you leave undone. You filibuster justice. So we got to stand up. We got to speak up. And somebody may have to even accept that we sometimes got to fight the church. Because too much religion has become complicit with the giants. They become accessories to the giants. Oh, let me go back to the text. David's men had an answer for the giants. Because when there are giants in the land, you've got to have an answer. You can't let a giant keep talking and you don't have an answer. And it's time for those of us that know right to say, we've got an answer for these giants today. The For the People Act is an answer. The Voting Rights Act is an answer. Passing $15 living wage is an answer. Getting rid of the filibuster is an answer. Look at your neighbor, Colbert, say, for a giant, you got to have an answer. You can't let the giant have the last word. David has shown his people, you got to answer a giant. You can't be comfortable with blasphemy. You can't let the giant just trample all over your people. You've got to have an answer for a giant because every Goliath has to be challenged. Seems like I feel something now. We may not know how we're going to defeat him, but you at least got to stand up and speak up. You're not just going any kind of way. My grandmama and them and those before them, they didn't know how they would defeat the giants, but they looked at him in his ugly face and said, before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'm going home with my Lord to be free. We know things don't have to be this way, and we've got to give an answer. And here's the reason I read chapter 22, because when David's men give an answer, then David describes the victory in a song. And David says, God's voice sounded like thunder. David describes what they did as the voice of God. Can I close right here? The voice in Hebrew is the word koil, K-O-L. And the word for vote in Hebrew is koil, K-O-L. In other words, your voice is your vote, and your vote is your voice. And when the Bible says the voice of the prophets, it means the coil of the prophets. When it says God's voice spoke, it means the coil of God. It means the vote of God. Somebody walk with me. And so David said, when God saw his people giving an answer, then God said, I'm going to join my voice to their voice. And when heaven's voice gets on your side, it's an amplification like you've never seen. The Bible says God's voice was God's vote, and it sounded like thunder, and it looked like lightning, and it shook up the Philistines, and it shook up injustice. We still need the voice and the vote of God. And all we got to do, Bishop, is simply echo the voice of God. We got to put some oil on our coil. We got to put some anointing on our voice. Every time we march, we ought to echo God's voice. Every time we pray, we ought to echo God's voice. If God's voice is speaking justice, then we ought to speak justice. If God's voice is speaking love, then we ought to speak love. If God's voice is speaking truth, then we ought to speak truth. Yeah! Every time we preach, ought to be God's voice. Every time we stand, ought to be God's voice. Every time we go to the ballot box, ought to be God's voice. And if we do, God will thunder. God will shake up the Congress. God will shake up the Senate. God will shake up the lies. God will shake up the greed. Because when God speaks, Pharaoh comes down. When God speaks, Caesars come down. When God speaks, down. When God speaks, the waves come down. When God speaks, injustice comes down. Do I have a witness? I got to go to Arizona. But when God's voice spoke to my soul, it saved me and healed me and made me what I am. Do I have a witness? I wish we didn't have to fight. Sometimes I get tired. I got a message that said they were going to kill me if I came to Texas. But when those days come, sometimes I get discouraged and all my work seems in vain. But then the Holy Spirit comes, revives my soul again. I've seen the lightning flash. I've heard the thunder roll. I've felt sin breakers trying to conquer my soul. But I heard the voice of Jesus say, still, fight on. I'll never.
Hi, I'm Tim Lee.
And I am Edison McChristie.
And we have a special announcement for you.
We do.
Listen, do you have any children at home between 6 and 16-year-olds, especially on Saturdays doing nothing?
Well, if you do, Rainbow Push Coalition have hope for you.
And that hope is in the form of a STEM and sports summer camp.
Amazing. What does that include?
It includes STEM. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Okay.
And that's going to break down into we teaching your students jobs for the future.
Amazing.
Drones, right?
Yes, digital gaming.
Digital gaming and robotics.
Coding too.
And coding, yes.
Yes.
We're also going to be teaching financial literacy. What are they going to be able to do with that money once they make it?
Invest. They're going to invest. I think so.
And then we cannot do anything, especially in this day and age, without the fitness and the sport.
I'm ready for it. So guess what? Get ready. I'm on turn rope. I'm jumping. We teaching double dutch. We teaching basketball. And we're running with the best. This whole event is free. I mean, free sports, free play,
and free learning.
Free food.
Listen, if you want to take advantage of these opportunities that Reverend Jackson continues to give to the community after 55 years.
55 years? You mean half of a century plus 5? That's mathematics. Okay.
Come down to Rainbow Push, the headquarters at
930 East 50th Street.
Or come to the website at www.pushexcel.org for more information. Listen, the dates of the program as we conclude the dates are
July 17th,
which is this Saturday.
This
and
Saturday.
It ends
August 28th.
Yes, so we have all this time to have this much fun with your children, okay? Listen, when you get down here, you're gonna see and hear Etta McChristian.
You're gonna see Tim Lee.
And we are going to sign off now by saying, keep hope alive.
I am. Now look, I am somebody.
And we're pushing for peace.
Push Excel's goal is to inspire students to strive for excellence in education in spite of personal, family, and community challenges that they might experience. How do we do this? By advocating for educational policies that guarantee equal funding for all students without regard to race or economic standing. By engaging parents, students, and teachers in pursuing high-quality education and striving for educational excellence at every level. And by forging partnerships with community-based and public sector stakeholders in education. Now, Push Excel is a national model program with the purpose of connecting principals, parents, popular personalities, and students in a bond and to support students at every level on the educational ladder. Now, we want you to become a member of the Rainbow Push Coalition and Push Excel. Your annual membership can help us to change policies that impact students, colleges, and universities all around the country. So step up and sign up today. Membership is only $35, and if you're a student or a senior, $15. Just go to our website, rainbowpush.org, and push join to become a member or push donate to support the Push Excel program. You can also text the word Push Excel, that's PUSHEXCEL, to 41444 on your cell phone, and you can give us any amount that you feel comfortable giving or call us at 773-256-2775. Wherever you are, you can support us as we keep pushing for you. And remember to keep hope alive.
Dr. Kim, I went to jail with a group of 7 students, July 17, 1960, almost 60 years ago. We never stopped moving. I lost a few jail cells and death. We never stopped moving. I thought it was time to write some of it down so the older generation can learn how we did and what we did and how global it was. Whether speaking about Mandela in South Africa, India, Qatar, about Gandhi in India, here at home. This book tells the story, so please get it, to give it to your friends. Read it, let's argue about it, let's discuss it.
Yep, so the book is Keeping Hope Alive, Sermons and Speeches of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. It's quite a good collection. You know, we've got sermons and speeches from around the globe because you have made such a global impact, not just here in the U.S., but around the world.
Thank you for tuning in to our International Saturday morning broadcast. We need your support. Here are ways to give to Rainbow Push Coalition. Text PUSH, P-U-S-H, to 41444 to support the work of Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr. and Rainbow Push Coalition. When you shop, Amazon gives. Visit Amazon Smile and select Push for Excellence as your charitable organization by starting your shopping at smile.amazon.com.
We are Sanctuary. We are a sanctuary.
When I think of Rainbow Push, I think of two words: social justice.
Education advocacy.
Political empowerment.
Freedom and equality.
Corporate partnership.
Stop the violence. Save the children. Don't get in. Shut it down. If we don't get in, shut it down.
Political change.
Inclusion, evolution. Progress, justice.
Jesse Jackson.
Keep hope. Keep hope alive. Alive. Keep hope. Keep hope alive. Alive.
We want to be bridges to end these cultural gaps.
We're going forward. By hope. By hope. Not backwards. Not backwards. By fear. By fear.